Hello, and I welcome everybody to this short talk. Here's Paul Scorpin. I'm sitting here in my seminar room. It's a day off. I just taught Healing 1, and tomorrow I'll start teaching Healing 2. And the reason why I'm here today is because it's June 26, 2024 in the afternoon. And I want to take you back 30 years in time to a time when I was living on the island of Cyprus, exactly 30 years ago today in a couple hours. And some of you might know that I had the great fortune of being able to work very, very closely with one of the greatest healers and mystics of recent times. He was known as the Magus of Strovolos, he was known as Daskalos, and his real name was Stylianos Ateshlis. And I got to the island in the late 80s and was invited to stay and work with him, which I did, of course. And in June of that year, we traveled to Brazil, Daskalos, his daughter, and I. And in São Paulo, Daskalos gave a couple of talks to an audience. And then when that came to an end, we stayed on for a few days because just to enjoy Brazil. And then we flew from Brazil to Rio, and from Rio to Zurich, Switzerland, and from Zurich to Larnaca, Cyprus, in early June. That was a long trip, especially for Daskalos, but it was a great trip for Daskalos because he loves the tropics. I remember we were staying in a nice hotel and they had a buffet for breakfast, and I was sitting there along with Daskalos, and I said, "Do you want me to get you some food for breakfast?" He said, "Please." So I went and collected some exotic fruits, just intuitively. And when I brought it back to the table, his daughter said, "My father would never eat that. He'll never eat that. He doesn't want that." And Daskalos just said, "This is exactly what I wanted." Because I was so attuned with Daskalos' well-being, I called myself his bodyguard. Because I was young. When I got there, I was 28. That I could actually feel, his physical well-beingness, and I could feel when he was in any danger. And that was a wonderful time, because he was an aging mystic and healer, now in his 80s, and I was a young American, full of vitality, and relatively strong at the time. But he was also very strong at the time. Okay, so we flew back, and then a group came from Switzerland, I believe, and from Germany for some private teachings on Governor's Beach. And he gave a number of talks there at I think at the hotel, but we had lunch at Governor's Beach. Somebody had a birthday party. I have a photo of that somewhere. And then we drove back from Governor's Beach back to the apartment house. Now, I had an apartment on the third story, and Daskalos had an apartment on the fourth story. He took it reluctantly, but he took it about a year before then because he wanted to finish writing some books. And because people read the Magus of Strovolos, they thought they could just knock on Daskalos' door and share a coffee with him. But by then, there were 200 or 300 people on the island to see Daskalos. So he reluctantly agreed to take the apartment just that he could write. Otherwise, he would be bothered constantly. And then his daughter and his son-in-law had an apartment on the fifth floor, the top floor, and the apartment building belonged to them. And it was planned that he would come down to my apartment at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because either we were working on a book project or he wanted to give a teaching. And it took place in my apartment. So I made a fresh pot of coffee around 4 o'clock, and I set up the video camera to record these sessions. And Daskalos was always punctual, always. And he wasn't on that day. He didn't come down. And I thought nothing of it. I thought, we just made this big trip to Brazil. And he was not a young man. Maybe he needed, and he just taught. Immediately upon returning to the island, he started to teach. And so I just thought, well, maybe he just needs more sleep. Let him sleep. And then his daughter knocked on my door and said, "Where's my father?" And I said to her, "I think he just needs some sleep. We just got finished with this trip, and now he just taught this morning." And she said, "Yeah, I'm worried." And I said, "Well, then I'm worried too." So we went up to the 4th floor, and we knocked on the door, and there was no answer. It was dead silent. His daughter had a universal key, so she went up to her flat to get the key, and she slipped it into the cylinder and turned the key, and the door opened. And when you entered, there was the living room. And Daskalos had a desk where he wrote. He wrote all his books longhand. Okay, he wrote them all longhand. And so the paper was neatly there with a pencil there. And but the apartment was quiet. And so I cautiously moved down the hallway past the kitchen on the left side. It's like yesterday, I'm sorry. I made my first visit to Cyprus last month after being away for 28 years. And it was like yesterday. And then turned into his bedroom, and he was lying unconscious on his bed and still. And at that moment, we realized it was pretty serious, okay? So we couldn't wake him. And so we organized 3 other men, and we rolled his body onto a blanket. And then we carefully led him down the hallway into the corridor and put him in the lift. And then we went down to the ground floor, and the ambulance was waiting for him, and they took him away. Later that day, we learned from the hospital that Daskalos, and now I have to use my words carefully, you would say suffered a major stroke in the left hemisphere of the brain. It was painful, without a doubt, very painful, and he stayed in the hospital for a few days, and then it was determined that he could then return home. So we organized a hospital bed and placed it in his bedroom. And a couple of days after having the massive stroke, he was brought home, and we found it was very difficult to find somebody, a nurse to take care of him. Very difficult because he was so controversial on the island. But we found somebody, and the person we found was a male nurse, quite large, and he was homosexual. And homosexuality at Cyprus during the time was really forbidden. And I'll say more about him later. And so Daskalos could no longer stand up. He was completely paralyzed on the right side of his body, and he could not articulate. He could grunt, but he could not articulate. And, it was like from one moment you're just bathing in the wisdom and grace and love of one of the most incredible men to grace this earth in recent times. And it's almost like these great redwood trees in California, when they cut them down, they just fall to the ground, lifeless. And that was what it was like to have Daskalos go from being a very powerful, beautiful, loving, wise teacher to being bedridden, and sometimes during the day he would be placed in a wheelchair. Daskalos told me a year beforehand, Paul, you know I have no wishes. You can wish everything you want. You can wish for your daily bread, and if you want, you can wish for a piece of cheese or a piece of salami. But I have no wishes. I said, Daskalos, I know that. But I do have 2 wishes. He confided in me. As I age, I never wanted to be bedridden. And I never want to end up in a wheelchair. Now, you have to know something about Daskalos. He said, be careful what you wish, because if it doesn't materialize in this life, it might materialize in the next life. And so it was. The 2 things Daskalos wished not to experience, he experienced. Okay. Now, I sat by his bedside many, many evenings into the night. As a matter of fact, Daskalos was my first client because I saw that he was in some agony. And so I said, okay, Daskalos, you've been calling me to come up and help you with healing for the last 5 years. And I always said no. I said, I don't understand healing. And he had so much patience. He said, Paul, just sit and watch me, sit and listen to the talks. And it became a ritual, actually quite a hilarious ritual, that he kept saying, Paul, okay, now you've heard enough, and now you've seen enough. Please come and now lay your hands on people. And I said, Daskalos, you're famous. People come here from America, from Germany, from Austria, from Switzerland. They don't want an American to lay their hands on. And it went on like that. And then I'm sitting there with Daskalos on his bedside in the still of the night, and he's struggling against a stroke. And I said, okay, Daskalos, I'm there now. And I laid my hand on on the left hemisphere of his brain, and he went into a very peaceful sleep. And I can tell you, folks, one thing, I have no idea if he did that to make out of me a healer, or if it actually worked. And let me tell you a little bit about Daskalos and the stroke. He didn't decide to have a stroke. Nobody decides to have a stroke. Nobody that I know of. It was decided for him. And I'll get to that in a second. So, he fought against the stroke. And quite strong he fought against the stroke. He was very uneasy. And I understand that. I mean, it was like being in a prison. And we'll get back to that. And it went on for a couple of months, and it was hard to see. And what was even more difficult to witness was the male nurse that we had was actually quite brutal to Daskalos, actually burned his feet with hot water at one point, scalding hot water, burned his feet. And everybody was terribly upset, but we had no other choice but to keep him. So then letters started to come from Europe and America saying, if Daskalos is a great healer, then he will heal himself. And if Daskalos wants to continue and pass on, then he will decide to pass on. And the family was really upset by this, rightly so. They said, Paul, can you please write a letter in our name? A general letter to just tell these people to respect Daskalos' privacy, because even they said to Christ, why doesn't he come down from the cross? It was very similar to that. So I sat down and I wrote a letter. And I said, thank you all for your wishes and your concerns. And then I continued to write nicely. And then I got to the point, I said, please stop writing. Stop asking if Daskalos will heal himself. That's a very private matter. And if Daskalos wants to continue, he will decide himself if he continues. And then I said, loving regards, family Ateshlis. So as always, I was trained to take this letter to Daskalos like I did when I took a chapter from a book to Daskalos. I said, Daskalos, can I read this to you? He was sitting in the wheelchair. And he sat here and I sat there like we did in the stoa for the last 5 years. I sat always on his left side to make sure he had water, especially when it got hot in June and July. And so I said, Daskalos, I have a letter that's written in the name of the family about letters that we're receiving. Can I read it to you? And he went, nicely. And so I started to read it. You know, thank you for your concern. Thank you for your warm greetings. We appreciate it. And then it got to these 2 lines about whether Daskalos would heal himself or not. And Daskalos was never, ever angry with me. Never. And I realized I had written something wrong. And I said, you know, I got to read the next line. And Daskalos will decide if he moves on or if he stays with us. Warm regards, loving regards from the family, your family. And so I was confused at the time, and I said, you know, Daskalos, I think I should read it again to you. Mind you, his left hand was still very powerful. And I had the letter in my hand right next to him. So we get to these 2 lines again, and he grabs my hand, my wrist, with the letter, and he moves it upwards towards the sky, towards heaven. And at that moment I realized Daskalos was confessing in me that the stroke was not his choice, and he could not determine the course of the stroke. It was decided for him. And that was so graceful and so beautiful. And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, Daskalos entered a state of deep resignation and acceptance. And he stopped fighting. And he started to smile again, and he actually started to laugh again. And something switched around October. What switched? So the first year I was installed in Cyprus and had the responsibility to open the stoa, because I got the key from Kostas, and I greeted people and I would show them a seat in the stoa. I got to know some of the people, you know, from Europe and America. And I started to talk to them afterwards about, you know, why they're there and how they're finding the talks and everything. And a lot of them said, I love what Daskalos is saying, but I especially love something he says about once a week. What did he say once a week back then? He would say in the open talks that the body is a prison. And he would quote the Bible because the spirit is strong and the flesh is weak. And, you know, I was very shy with Daskalos, extremely shy. I hadn't been there that long. And I thought, something doesn't make sense here, you know. Here's somebody who's like at home in the Christ consciousness. Actually, he was in the Christ consciousness. And he's admired as somebody who is loving, wise, and powerful. And the people coming to Cyprus have been searching for a long time, like a lot of people have. And their search was bearing no fruit, or little fruit, apparently. And they landed in depression. And some of them even confided in me that they had thoughts of suicide. They even tried to commit suicide. They showed me the mark on the hand, on the arm, where they slit their wrist. And they said, it's so wonderful that this great teacher is telling us as the body's a prison, because that's exactly how I feel about the body. And so I got my courage up, and trust me, it wasn't easy, because Daskalos was an incredible man. And I went to Daskali and I said, Daskali, we have to talk. Normally he would come to me and say to me, Paul, we have to talk. And then he'd start telling me about my past lives. This time, the tables were turned, and I went to Daskalos and I said, Daskali, you're saying about once a week that the body's a prison. I know you experience the body as a prison because you're in the Christ. And I know you find the body complicated and small. But I've got to know a few people now who are coming here to listen to your talks. And they're depressed. And they are not so much at home on the earth, not even fully incarnated. And when they hear you as a teacher confirm their core belief, and I added, a lot of them shared with me their thoughts about suicide. To Daskalos, I added that. I said, maybe they go home, less at home in their body when they came to the island. And Daskalos, Daskalos was like a child. He was like a child. He was just so innocent. And he was so much in the moment. And he said, oh, you're right. We will never teach that again. We will never teach that again. Meaning he and John. The next day we were down in the Stoa. I was sitting there. Everybody was sitting there. Daskalos was sitting here. And he was in the middle of a talk. And he said, and the body is and he turned to me, closed his mouth, laughed at me, turned to the audience. I have this on video. Turned to the audience and said, I'm not allowed to teach that anymore. And I don't know what he said. Maybe he said the body's a great gift. But that didn't solve the issue within Daskalos. He didn't teach that again, but it did not reconcile the fact that Daskalos was not at home in the body. So, I've woken up in the last 15 years to the divine feminine, thanks to the Sophia, and then to Artemis, and then to the Holy Spirit as a feminine force. And I didn't get that when I was on the island of Cyprus, that there was a reason that Daskalos had the stroke. But when I started to heal myself, heal other people, start to work as a healer, then I also learned from a lot of people here in Germany that they were not at home in their bodies. They were not at home in their bodies. Like Daskalos wasn't. And then I started thinking about Daskalos' stroke. 30 years ago today. And I thought Daskalos' stroke was, for Daskalos, the last initiation. Because Daskalos was fully integrated. But he had too little peace with the earth, with his body, and with the divine feminine. I'll share with you one more story, and then I think we'll close this talk. One summer, we traveled just on a holiday to Italy in August. His daughter, his grandson, and myself. And we were staying in Venice, which in August is pretty hot, but I don't know why we did it, but we did it. It doesn't matter. I remember we went to a tavern one night, and I was sitting next to Daskalos, and there was a violinist there playing Bach, Verdi, Beethoven, Vivaldi. Beautiful. Daskalos turned to me and said, Paul, listen, the next song he'll play will be a gypsy song, a Hungarian gypsy song. I said, Daskalos, we're sitting in Venice, he's going to play more Bach. Sure enough, the next song he played was a gypsy song. This is called White Magic. Daskalos went into his psyche and arranged it that he would play a gypsy song, and then Daskalos just laughed. Okay, it doesn't matter. So we're staying in this hotel, directly on the river, and it was the 15th of August. Now, the 15th of August is the day of the Ascension of Mother Maria, both for the Catholics and for the Orthodox. It's one thing we share in the Catholic belief and the Orthodox is that day. And I thought, okay, Daskali, would you mind giving us a talk about the Virgin Mary on the day that she's being celebrated? And Daskalos always says yes. He always said yes. Always. Daskalos never said no. Makes it difficult when you're editing a book or writing a book with Daskalos. And I said, we can go up on the roof because then we have a view over the city. He said, sure. Yeah. So we went up through the stairs or the lift, I don't know. He wouldn't go on lifts. He would not go on elevators, period. He would not ride an elevator. He didn't trust them. Anyhow, we made it there, and I set up the tripod with the camera, and I said, Daskali, please tell us all about the life and of Virgin Mary. And he went into a beautiful talk, which I'd heard many times about the father and mother of Virgin Mary, even the grandparents of Virgin Mary, and her childhood. And it was really lovely, and I loved hearing those stories. I could listen to them endlessly. And then I just said, and then he said, okay, let's go down and have breakfast. And I said, wait, I have one more question, He said, okay. I said, can you please tell us what the Virgin Mary symbolizes, what she embodies? And he was dead silent. He wasn't prepared for the question. Daskalos was hardly ever dead silent. He didn't say anything for like a minute. He looked at me and he said, the Virgin Mary symbolizes the pan-universal feminine. And then he said, enough, let's go down and have breakfast. And he didn't want to talk any more about it. That was the only time. It was really, literally the only time that Daskalos talked about the Divine Feminine as the Divine Feminine, and talked about the fact that the Virgin Mary and probably Maria Magdalena are a full incarnation of the Divine Feminine. So I want to tell you about the stroke. It's very simple. If you know something about the two hemispheres of the brain, then you probably know that the right hemisphere of the brain tends to be more feminine. It is interested in harmony, peace, and connection. And the left side of the brain is more designed to hold a language, not exclusively, but and has the numbers in it, and wisdom, and so forth, and so forth. Christianity, in its construction, had a problem from the very beginning with the feminine. And as a matter of fact, the two heads of the early church, Peter and Paulos, had a major problem with the feminine. Okay, even though Peter was married, we know that. Paul not, and they are literally the two cornerstones of the Catholic Church and also the Orthodox Church. And Daskalos, when he incarnated directly soon after the crucifixion in Egypt as Origen, opened up a center in Caesarea in the Holy Land to study the Gospels. And Origen decided that his phallus was a problem, so he cut it off. He castrated himself as a solution to solve sexuality. Daskalos, in this last incarnation as Stelos and Teslis, when he was a young teenage boy, he practiced once autoeroticism. He masturbated. And to punish himself, he took a nail and put it over a candle until it was red, and he scored his arm with it. And he showed me the scar and was proud about it. Okay? So the thing is Daskalos is a product of history as well. He's fairly free of history, but nonetheless, 30 years ago, he was very much a product of history and also of organized Christianity, because he was a devout Orthodox. I'll never forget a teacher, a female teacher, came from Switzerland and with a copy of the Gospel of Thomas, which we made a film of in German here, and gave it to Daskalos as a present. And Daskalos laid his hand on it and said, "Don't read this. Thomas wrote it, but it's full of Thomas, and Thomas, you can't take Thomas seriously." And then 25 years later, I made a film out of it, and there's one saying in the Gospel of Thomas which encapsulate true Christianity. It's number 22. And Jesus is in the city or town with his students, and the students ask him, "Rabbi, when do we come into the kingdom of heavens?" And there was a mother there who was nursing a baby, and Jesus pointed to the baby and said, "You have to become like that child." And they said, "What? Wait, what do you mean? I mean, we're adults." And then he said, "When the above comes together with the below." Now, I bring that into connection with the chakras. When the above, or heaven and earth, come together as one with each other. And when the left comes together with the right as one. And when the inside comes together with the outside as one. And then he says something remarkable. And when the feminine comes together with the masculine, that there is no feminine anymore and there is no masculine anymore, then you're in the kingdom of heavens. And don't forget, a baby doesn't even know if it's a boy or a girl, is not separated at all, doesn't have any self-awareness, okay? And so, this is what I'm trying to say, is that Daskalos was very, very integrated, but not fully, okay? And if anybody can say that, it would be me. Because I was with him every day for the last years of his life, and I received so much, and I'm not trying to brag, I'm just trying to tell you, I received so much private instruction over so many years, either in my apartment or in Governor's Beach, and I was indoctrinated into the inner circle 5 months after I arrived, and I was able to travel with Daskalos every April to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, to New York, to Maine, to Brazil. So I had an access to Daskalos that hardly anybody had, except his family. But I'm not his family, okay? And so for Daskalos, the stroke was not decided by Daskalos, and how the stroke unfolded was not decided by Daskalos. But I can tell you one thing, he is deeply, deeply grateful for the stroke. Because through the stroke, and only through the stroke, could he reconcile with both the feminine, the body, and the earth. And that's the last reconciliation in the spiritual path. And there's two other great examples. You can look for them yourself. Jill Bolted Taylor had the stroke and wrote a book about her stroke, and said when she was in the middle of the stroke and she had a tumor exploded in the left hemisphere by her, she said she was in nirvana. She was in nirvana, and she wanted to stay there. She described that state as nirvana because she had full access to the divine feminine in that state. Thank God she lived to talk about it and write a book about it. My Stroke of Insight is the book. My Stroke of Insight is the book. Auf einen Schlag auf Deutsch. And then a wonderful, wonderful man called B.D. Griffin was an Anglican priest raised in the Anglican tradition in England. And he was Daskalos' age. And he decided that he would travel to India and create a monastery in India, in Kerala, that he would then encourage an exchange between Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and Christianity. And he succeeded. Beautiful man. I have letters from him. We had an exchange. B.D. Griffin, exactly at Daskalos' age, suffered a massive stroke in the left hemisphere of his brain and was paralyzed and speechless. The difference between B.D. Griffin and Daskalos was incredibly powerful at over 80, and B.D. Griffin was very, very small, very fine, with a fine white beard, long white hair, orange robes and stuff, very fine, but not strong, physically not strong. And almost everybody thought B.D. Griffin's going to die now because he's not going to recover from that. It's too extreme. And he did recover. He did recover. And he could talk again and he could walk again. And then a TV production firm came from Delhi to visit him. And they said, Herr Griffin, Mr. Priest, whatever you call him, could you explain to us and for our audience how it worked out with your plan to have an exchange between Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism and Christianity with your monastery here? He said, wonderful, wonderful. And they said, we have one last question for you. Can you please share with us what your stroke was like? And there's a YouTube video from this. And it's incredible. He said, for over 70 years, I thought Christianity had to do with Jesus Christ, and only Jesus Christ. And now I realize that Christianity needs exactly as much from the divine feminine as the divine masculine. And then he said, we need to surrender to the mother. We need to surrender to the mother. And that was his last thing on this talk. And I know that if Daskalos could walk again and talk again, he would share that sentiment from B.D. Griffin. Because through the stroke, Daskalos surrendered to the mother, to the body, and to the earth. Okay, so now it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock on the island of Cyprus, and back then I probably started to make the coffee. And the drip coffee, the pot was ready. I'd taken a nap myself, without a doubt. And everything was set up in my living room. And that old man didn't knock. He didn't come. The day the music died. So I just wanted to share that with you because it's an anniversary today of something that's bittersweet. And also I want to tell you folks that I'll be on the island of Cyprus again in September to offer my healing education in a hotel in Polis, where the woman who has the hotel says, I have 2 spirit guides taking care of my hotel. One of them's the Mother Maria and the other one's Daskalos. And she never experienced Daskalos personally, but she knows who he was and how. So I'll be teaching healing 1 over 4 days and healing 2 over 4 days. And on Wednesday, we'll all get in a bus and we'll drive the 2 hours over the island to visit Strovolos, and we visit Daskalos' house. You can't go in anymore because it's falling to the ground. And we'll visit the stoa where he taught, and we'll visit his grave together. That was a very, very emotional reunion for me. I was prepared for everything, but still it hit me hard. As a matter of fact, I went there sort of like the lost son, wanting to get an approval from Daskalos that everything I've done in the last 28 years is okay, because everything he gave me, did I do well with it? And what I actually got from Daskalos for the first time was his love. As I visited his grave and stood behind his grave, I said again, Daskalos, I have your back. And at that moment I was flooded with his love, because when I was 28 years old, I was still fully traumatized from my childhood, and I didn't think it was worthy to get the love from such a great man. I couldn't take it. And even now, when I look at photos of Daskalos and I together, and he's looking directly in my eyes with so much love, then I realized I didn't think I was worthy enough to receive this love. And that's what I received in May this year. So I share that with you. So if you have time to join, it's going to be warm because the seminar room's warm, air conditioned, and it's in a nice part. And you can walk from there to the Baths of Aphrodite. And I would love to teach you healing on the island where I learned all this theory about healing and about the Christ path and about John, and on the island where I had my first client. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thank you for listening. I know it was too long, but I'm getting very sentimental because I'm actually nearly finished with the book about Daskalos. Okay. Take care. Peace out.